Hi, welcome back to the Fastball Profits. My name is Rob Scurvy. Thanks for joining me tonight. It's Sunday night, basically the end of week 6. We just got done seeing the Giants beat the Denver Broncos. We want to get you some early thoughts in terms of get you some names to consider for week 7 waiver wire claims. Now, coming up this week, we got Detroit and Houston that are going to be on a bye. So if you have a quarterback like Watson, who by the way has been tearing it up, you're going to have to look elsewhere, and we're going to give you some names to consider. The other thing you may be looking to deal with are injuries. The NFL has been hit by a rash of injuries, especially to big name players. Last week, Odell Beckham was one of the bigger names that went down. I heard a lot of people. I heard me personally. I've got him in a keeper league, and so I wasn't sure what to do. Didn't like my depth on my bench. My guys were all right, but not nearly the caliber. Not that anybody out there really is at this point. Looked at the waiver wire, just didn't feel good about it. So I actually made a trade. I mortgaged my future to play for this year because I was having a good year. Well, another major injury today that hurts not only the fastball community, but it's going to hurt football in general is Aaron Rodgers went down with a broken collarbone. He's going to be out for the year. Obviously, that's going to hurt everybody who owned Aaron Rodgers. But anybody who owns Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, or Cook is also going to be hurt. Their production is going to drop, obviously. Another guy that went down today with an injury was Jameis Winston. Now, he left the game with a shoulder injury. He didn't come back. We don't know the extent of that injury at this point, so keep your eyes on that this week. Another guy today that was a little banged up was Leonard Fournette. This guy's having an unbelievable season as a rookie running back. He's tearing it up today. He had another great game. He injured his ankle. Now, he did come back in the game, but for the final drive, he wasn't on the field, so it's hard to tell exactly what's going on there. Keep an eye on that. So just a lot of injuries, whether it's bye week injuries or lack of production. We want to give you some names to consider. We won't just talk about guys that you should pick up, but maybe guys, maybe you're on the fence for what. Maybe we'll give you some reasons as to maybe why you don't want to use them this week or why you want to look elsewhere for other picks. Another major change this week is San Francisco sat quarterback Hoyer. He was ineffective, and I think they're just beginning to look and build for the future. And so we're going to start with quarterbacks. Some quarterbacks we want you to consider or maybe not consider. We'll give you some information, some food for thought there. The first quarterback is Andrew Luck. Now, we talked about him last week. Once again, this is just a reminder, kind of a no-brainer out there. He's a very good quarterback. He's been out with injuries. He's still available in 39% of leagues, and he's starting to throw the ball, and so he's on everybody's radar. And all reports are that he's probably not going to start his first game until November, but you're kind of at this point now. If you wait too much longer, other owners will begin to snatch him up, and this is probably the week you're going to need to get him when he's still somewhat available out there in the waiver wire. Andrew Luck is a guy you can pick up, especially if you've been struggling. He's a good long-term fix. Now, another guy out there that you may want to consider, we'll talk about him briefly, C.J. Beathard, quarterback for San Francisco. He plays Hoyer today, and he was really ineffective. Hoyer, so they brought him in, and he actually moved the ball fairly well. Now, he's a rookie quarterback, third-round pick out of Iowa. Now, next week he faces Dallas. Now, Dallas gives up the eighth most points to quarterbacks. And I think they're going to need to throw the ball to stay in the game because Dak Prescott started the year slow, but he's starting to play really well now. He's starting to throw the ball effectively. And so I think that San Francisco's going to have to throw the ball to stay in the game. Once again, CJ looked pretty decent today, but there's just so many question marks. One thing I want to consider, he's a rookie quarterback playing for a team that's got average weapons around him, and it's his first start. So there's so many question marks with that. He looked good in the first game coming in relief, but now Dallas will know he's going to start next week, and they have an opportunity to look at game film, prepare for them. And so even though he's got a good matchup on paper, I think that'd be a little risky to go with this rookie at this point. I would probably look elsewhere than CJ if you need a quarterback. Another guy is Brett Hundley. Obviously, he took over today for Aaron Rodgers, who broke his collarbone, is out for the year. He's available in 99% of leagues out there. It might be a little risky, but he's a guy that if you're desperate out there, that I wouldn't be opposed, or I'd certainly be comfortable rolling the dice with him. He's got a good matchup this week against the Saints. He's got a lot of good weapons around him, as we know. Certainly a good running game right now. And he's got, of course, Nelson, Cobb, Adams. And he's been in the league 3 years, so even though he hasn't started a lot of games or played a lot of games, he's been in the league a while, and he's been groomed by watching and being around Rodgers a lot. And so, obviously, he is no Aaron Rodgers. You need to temper your expectation, but he's a guy that I think with the matchup this week against New Orleans, you could feel comfortable playing, and he'll have a decent week for you. Another guy out there is Case Keenum. Let's talk about him briefly. He's somebody that you could pick up. He is available in 90% of leagues. Well, unfortunately, there's talk that Sam Bradford's knee injury could actually be career-ending at this point. In fact, there's some real concerns coming out of Vikings camp. But even if it's not career-ending, it would certainly seem from this point forward that this is going to be Case's team the rest of this year. So everything points to him being the starting quarterback moving forward. So he's a guy that could you use. Is he a guy that you could plug in there? Well, if you take away 1 week against a porous Tampa Bay defense, he had a really good week there. Besides that, he's been okay at best. Really what it boils down to, he's a game manager, and he's very much matchup dependent. So if he doesn't have a good matchup, he's not a guy that you could roll with. Now next week they're playing Baltimore, and Baltimore is very good against the pass. You add on the fact that the Vikings defense will probably keep that a very low scoring game because right now Flacco is looking terrible. He's not moving the ball at all. He's just really stinking it up. So I think the Vikings defense will keep it low scoring. They can win the ball. They won't need him to do a whole lot. He's not somebody that I would be comfortable rolling with next week in terms of a quarterback option. Jared Goff is a guy that you could pick up. He's available in 62% of leagues. He's got a good matchup this week against Arizona. Now, Arizona's actually picking up a lot of points and a lot of passing yards, so they're a little weak on that. Now, he had a quiet game today, Jared did, against Jacksonville. Well, one, Jacksonville's defense is very good. Two, he didn't need to do much. They won the game, and he played really air-free ball. He managed the game. He had one touchdown, no picks. He's been looking better and better, but this is a matchup this week that you could actually pick up Goff, and you could start him and feel pretty comfortable with that. What about Tyrod Taylor? He's available out there. He's available in 64% of leagues. He's got a great matchup against Tampa Bay right now. Tampa Bay's been getting torched. Today they got torched by Carson Palmer. But as far as Tyrod Taylor goes, he's a guy who's got great legs, very athletic. He can beat you with his feet, but he's not a consistent quarterback in terms of throwing the ball, putting up big yardage. And I think right now a lot of his weapons are pretty banged up. We don't know if Matthews will be back for the game. And so you certainly could roll with him. He does have a good matchup, but he is an average quarterback, below average at best. So you could use him. You may want to look elsewhere. Once again, he does have Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is near the bottom of the league as far as yards and points allowed to quarterbacks. What about Ryan Fitzpatrick? Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick came in today for Jameis Winston, who got injured. He's backing up for Tampa Bay. That's where he kind of landed. He's available in 99% of leagues. Winston left a shoulder injury. We don't know the extent of that, so we'll have to watch that this week. Now, he's a veteran, so he's a guy that has had success in the NFL. Now, last year he had a brutal year, but the year before that he looked great, so you never know what you're going to get in terms of him. Now, he does have good weapons around him with Braid, Deshaun Jackson, Evans. Yeah, he's playing Buffalo. Now, here's the concern with that. He's got good weapons. He's a veteran quarterback, so he's going to have an occasional good game. But right now, Buffalo gives up the third fewest points to quarterbacks. And so if it turns out that Jameis doesn't play and Ryan's out there, you could roll with him. But against Buffalo, I'm not sure that that's a really good option at this point. I probably would look elsewhere. Derek Carr came back this week. He recovered a lot quicker from his back injury than expected. Now, today he didn't play great. He looked rusty, but he's a real deal. This guy is a quality quarterback. He's a future consistent, perennial all-pro quarterback. Now, he plays Kansas City this week coming up, and Kansas City actually gives up a good amount of points to quarterbacks. So this year, they're a little vulnerable to the passing game. And if you look at before his injury, he was a guy that was actually looking pretty solid. Now, the one concern I do have is last year when he played Kansas City, he really struggled. He had a very good year last year, but against Kansas City, for whatever reason, his quarterback rating was 49.1 and 81.1, and his TD to interception ratio was one touchdown and one interception in those two games. So for whatever reason, he struggled. But Kansas City this year seems like they're more vulnerable against the pass. He is a quality quarterback. And before his injury, 3 out of 4 games, he had a quarterback rating of over 100, and his touchdown interception ratio was 7-2. He's a guy that's a real deal, so I would pick him up. I would definitely go with him over some of the other names that we had mentioned previously. You can pick him up and roll with him. Another guy out there is Carson Palmer, available in 26% of the leagues. Well, they got Adrian Peterson today, so he ran the ball really well, over 100 yards, 2 TDs. Adrian might be able to take some of that pressure up. I know they've been able to put a lot of pressure on Carson Palmer. But Carson's looked really good. If you take away his week 1 that he really struggled with, since then he's had 8 touchdown passes and 3 interceptions. He's averaging during that time 317 passing yards a game. He's facing the Rams. The Rams are kind of middle of the pack as far as how many points allowed to quarterbacks they do. So Carson Palmer is available in about 26% of leagues. You should pick him up if you need a quarterback. He'll do you well. Okay, so we got Blake Bortles out there. He's out there in 96% of leagues. He's widely available. I'm just going to say right now, I'm not a Blake Bortles fan. I wasn't a fan going into this year. In fact, after his sophomore year, we had a really good year. We went out publicly and said that we felt like he was going to struggle, and sure enough, he did. So I've never been a big fan of this guy. I think he's got a lot of issues. I don't think he's a great quarterback. But this week he has a really good matchup against a weak Indianapolis defense that gives up the second most points to quarterbacks. If Leonard Fournette happens to be out this week, I think they're going to have to throw the ball a lot because when he wasn't in the game, they haven't been able to run it effectively. And so I think for 1 week, hard to believe I'm saying this, but I think Blake Bortles for 1 week is actually a good option. He's a guy that you could pick up, plug and play him in this week. Another guy you might consider is Josh McCown out there. Now, next week he plays Miami, and that's kind of a serviceable start. He's kind of middle of the road in terms of a guy that you could pick up. But I think you have to be very careful right now. He had a huge game, but he had a really good game against a New England defense that is just terrible, very porous against the pass. New England's got some real serious issues they need to work out there on defense if they're going to go anywhere in the postseason. And so even though he had a big week to week, if you take that out of it, he's been a very average quarterback. He does play Miami defense that's respectable. He is available in 92% of leagues. So he's somebody you could pick up. But once again, like so many guys I mentioned previously, I really hope there's other options out there for you. He's a guy that maybe can get you, 12 to 15 points this week, which isn't great, serviceable at best. Now, here's what I want to talk about. Now, sometimes when I quote guys or I talk about guys out there that aren't widely available, if they're available maybe in only 10 to 15% of leagues, I get a little pushback from people that say, hey, why are you talking about guys? Everybody knows that they're good, they're out there. Well, here's why I would agree with you. Most of you guys don't need me to tell you that Carson Wentz is a good option or that Marcus Mariota is a good option. But so often I've seen it where these guys will be available. And right now, if you look at it, Carson Wentz is available in 11% of leagues. So 90-some% of leagues he's not out there, but for 10% of you, he is out there. And so before you begin to look for other quarterbacks, just check. You never know. Don't make any assumptions. If these guys are out there, you got to pick them up. Marcus Mariota, a lot of people dropped him because he's been injured. He hasn't played. It sounds like he's going to play Monday night. So he's available in about 15% of leagues. He's got a great matchup against Cleveland, who got tore up by Watson today. So these are guys that probably aren't out there, but if they are, check. Just make sure they're too good to let go on the waiver wire. Pick up Wentz and Marcus Mariota. So here's some quarterbacks you need to avoid this week coming up. The other guys we mentioned, you can certainly use them. They're not great options, but here's guys I would definitely say to stay away from this week coming up. First guy I want to talk about is Andy Dalton. He's available in over 50% of leagues, but he's playing Pittsburgh. Right now, Pittsburgh's defense is #1 against the pass. They shut down Alex Smith today. Dalton has struggled this year. He's not a guy that you want to look at this week. Another guy out there is Eli Manning. Now, Eli Manning actually got a win tonight. He didn't look great. He did just enough to win. And I think he had around 140 yards passing and 1 TD, and that was it. They ran the ball a lot. But that whole team is just the walking wounded. They got 4 wideouts that are out this week. The #1 target was their tight end. They have Odell Beckham out, Marshall that's out. They might get Sterling Shepard back this week, but even that's questionable at this point. They're playing Seattle, who? Seattle's looking better and better. Their rush defense, their pass defense is getting more improved. They're looking like the Legion of Boom that we saw for so many years. And so I wouldn't be comfortable with Eli Manning. He's had his struggles. He's got a rough matchup. I would avoid him pretty much. Another guy out there that you may consider is Jay Cutler. Now, Jay Cutler is a guy, that had a decent game today. He did without Parker, which bodes well for him. Now, he plays the New York Jets. New York Jets actually has a decent pass defense. And so right now, what do we take of Jay Cutler? He went out today, had 2 touchdown passes, he looked decent. But before this game, he had 3 consecutive games where he was terribly brutal against matchups that were actually favorable for him, and yet he didn't put up good numbers. So he has 1 good week. Could this be the turnaround? Could Miami figure out their offense? It's possible. But I want to see more before I feel confident starting him. He's a guy that I'd still stay away from if I was you. Another guy that's out there a lot is Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco plays a very good Minnesota defense coming up. Minnesota's defense is very good. Today he stunk it up again. He had no TDs. He had 2 interceptions. All year long, right now he's got 4 touchdown passes to 8 picks. He's really, really struggled. Stay away from Joe Flacco. Here's another guy you want to stay away from. Trevor Siemian. He's available in 62% of leagues. Plays the Chargers. Well, right now the Chargers are kind of middle of the pack in terms of points allowed to quarterbacks. But if you take a look at Trevor this year, if you take out his outliner game against Dallas where he threw 4 touchdown passes, he's been decent at best, if not below average. And so he's a guy that I wouldn't feel very comfortable with. I think they're going to want to run the ball, play defense. Those are the type of games that they want to win there. They don't want to get into a shootout. So those are guys that I would stay away from at quarterback. Now I want you to consider some running back guys out there. Now, when we begin to talk about running backs, there's a few things. One, it's slim picking this time of year. Most leagues that are competitive, people that are looking out there, they're grabbing guys or stashing them on their bench. Any glimpse of talent has gone out there, so it becomes very, very difficult work. It's a lot of guesswork. You almost have to become a prognosticator. You have to play matchups, wait for injuries, trade, or simply stash a guy and just be patient at this time of year. It's really hard to find good running backs out there. Here's a hint I would give you if you're struggling or you need some running backs out there. Take a look at some teams that are starting to become out of contention, because what can happen is you look at a team that's out of contention. Sometimes what those teams will do is they will give carries to the younger, unproven players that are going to begin to build for the future. And so kind of look at their teams, look at their roster. If they have maybe a veteran running back, but they have some younger players there, great situations. Indianapolis, we'll use them for example. Frank Gore is a great back, but he's 34 years old. He's past his prime. That's a team that's really honestly probably in the process of rebuilding, if we're being honest. And so don't be surprised you start seeing Mac get more and more carries. If no other reason, the fact they want to try these younger guys out and really see what they have. So kind of take a look at teams like that. Now here's some running backs that you may want to consider. Now, some people ask me why I'll talk about guys that may not be readily available in terms of running backs. Well, Here's why. Why put the focus on players that might be available? I got to talk about a guy that's 95% available. I could talk about a guy that's 85% available. But if in reality I have no fantasy value, why talk about them? You can pick up a guy that's out there, but he needs to produce. That's the bottom line. So we're not just looking to pick somebody up. You're looking for value and production. So what I would see is if there's not somebody out there you feel like that you can pick up, the other thing you can do if you have trades in your leagues, you maybe want to look at a trade. Just don't pick a guy up for the sake of picking that guy. If you got to measure and be honest, does this guy have real value? And so that's why I don't focus as much about matchups also. When it comes to running back, I won't talk as much about who they're playing coming up. And here's why. When it comes down to running backs at this point, really volume trumps matchups. When it comes right down to it, more important than the matchup is the volume of carries and touches that running back is going to get. That's ultimately what you're looking for, because you can have a guy that has a great matchup, but if he only touches the ball 5-6 times a game, it doesn't really matter. You may have another guy that has a real tough matchup, but if he's going to get 20 carries or 6 or 7 targets in the passing game, then obviously he's probably going to hold a lot more value. So just some things to consider. Here's the first guy you want to take a look at out there. Adrian Peterson. Now right now, Adrian Peterson is available in about 20% of leagues. And apparently he still has some gas left in the tank, because today he went out, he had 134 yards and a robust 5.2 yards per carry. He had 2 TDs. So he looked great. He brought a lot of energy to that offense. It was wonderful. So he's out there in 20% of leagues. If you need to pick him up, he's going to be the starting back till David Johnson comes back. But according to reports, they'd be very hard-pressed to get David Johnson back by week 12 or 13 at this point. In fact, this is probably Adrian's team the rest of the year in terms of fantasy football. So he's a guy out there, 20% of leagues. If he's out there, you got to grab Adrian Peterson. So here's another guy you may want to consider, Dion Lewis. He's available in 90% of leagues. Now, this is the 4th week in a row that he's increased his carries. He's got great hands out of the backfield. He's really involved in the passing game. He's had back-to-back weeks over 50 yards rushing. And then this week, Mike Gillislee, the guy that usually gets the carries between the tackles, he fumbled. Now, if you know anything about Bill Belichick, he doesn't handle fumbling well. If you fumble, you get the bench. That's exactly happened for Mike for a while today. Now, with all that said, he's looked productive. He's seen increased carries. They use him in the passing game. But he's still only going to be a running back 3 or 4. And the reason why he has a low ceiling is they have so many weapons. There are so many other backs. They've got Rex when he comes back, White, Gillislee, so many others. So he's not a great option, but he's certainly worth a flyer if you're desperate for a running back out there. Dion Lewis is available. Once again, he's seen increased carries, yards, production. He can catch the ball in the backfield. He's a nice little weapon to have, but he will be inconsistent for you if you start him. But if you're desperate, take a look at him. Another guy out there is David Johnson. He's available in about 70% of leagues. Now, you're only going to see about 5 or 6 carries per game with him, but he's highly used in the passing game. Right now, he's got 26 receptions through 6 games. He's on pace for 70 catches. And I think that's going to continue, and here's why. That team doesn't have a lot of wide receiver talent, so their passing game, it's a lot of check down to their tight ends, to their running backs, so he's a guy that they use a lot in the passing game. And so, especially if you're in a PPR league, he's somebody that you could pick up out there and play. Duke Johnson still out there in about 17 to 20% of leagues. So here's a guy that actually is he's a real candidate for you guys to take a look at out there. It's Orlean Darkwa. We talked about him a little bit last week. He's available in 93% of leagues out there. So he's out there in almost every league. He had a great game today. He had well over 100 yards rushing against Denver. He's had 2 good weeks in a row where he's run the ball very well. His yards per carry looking good. And he's really settled into that lead role at this point. For a while, it looked like it's going to be Wayne Gallman. But I think what he's done is Wayne has kind of become your third down back, your change of pace, guy that comes off the bench. So Orlean Darkwa is a guy that you need to pick up there. He's available in 93% of leagues. He could be your savior for your running backs at this point. In fact, at this point in the last 2 games, and for the year, he's averaging over 5.5 yards per carry. Another guy out there that you want to pick up, and he might be a guy that you're going to have to probably be patient waiting on, is Matt Breida. He's available in 81% of leagues. Now, if you took a look at the San Francisco 49ers coaching staff, they loved him during training camp. They loved him in preseason. There was a lot of talk even before the season started that he was a better fit for that offense and that they weren't going to re-sign Hyde after this. Now, this week, Shanahan came out and he was quoted as saying that Breida and Hyde offer the same talent. So that's a pretty profound statement. There's also reports going out there right now that San Francisco is shopping Carlos Hyde. They're looking for a team that maybe needs a running back that'd be willing to make a trade. With all that talk and everything that's been going on, he's a guy that you need to pick up, stash on your bench. All it takes is Hyde continuing to struggle, or else he has a breakout game, or maybe they find a suitor to trade Hyde to, and this guy will become a legitimate #1 running back out there. So when you pick him up right now, you got to be patient. Don't expect him next week to get 15 to 20 carries a game, but he's definitely a stash, a guy you wait on who could pay off big in the end if you're very patient. Alvin Kamara, another guy out there we've talked a lot about lately. He's still available in about 20% of leagues. his carries have increased. If you look at the last 4 weeks, he had 1 carry, 2, 5, and then this week he had 10 carries. So that was the most carries he ever had, and he had 75 rushing yards. So up to this point, he's been effective mostly in the passing game. But the last 2 weeks, he's starting to look effective also in the running game. They're using him more and more. They trade away Adrian Peterson, and so he's going to continue to see a lot of action. He averages 5+ catches per game. Now, he's still behind Ingram. Mark Ingram had a really good game today, so don't expect him to leapfrog him there. But they're getting him involved quite a bit. And he's got great dynasty value. Got to pick up Alvin Kamara if he's out there. He's available in about 20% of leagues. Aaron Jones. Well, Aaron Jones is available in 23% of leagues out there. Now, with Aaron Rodgers out, what I would imagine, and I don't know, but I imagine as the Packers move forward, they're going to want to run the ball a lot more and throw the ball less. Just take pressure off of Hundley. And the guy I think is going to get a lot of those carries is Aaron Jones. He had more carries, more touches, more targets today than even Ty Montgomery, who came back. He's just a better running back overall. Maybe not as better. Maybe he's not as effective pass catcher as Ty, but he's a better running back. He fits that role better. And I think with this team needing to run the ball to take pressure off, now that Aaron Rodgers is out, he's a guy that's going to benefit greatly from that. He's available in 23% of leagues. Another guy out there, Isaiah Crowell, available in 21% of leagues. Now, there's nothing exciting about him here. He has struggled, but he has talent. The coaches love him. They said time and time again they like to see him get the ball. They feel like he's a really good running back. And I think it's reasonable to assume that even though he hasn't a great start to this year, he's going to turn it around. He's a very talented guy. He's got a lot of upside. And they're going to continue to give him the ball at this point because he's the best running back they have there. And he's a lead back. And when it comes right down to it, like we said, volume trumps everything else. And he's going to get a volume of the carries. He's going to get the touches. And right now at this point, if you're desperate for running back, just to find a back who's going to get 10, 15 carries a game, it's a hard find. And he's available in about 20% of leagues out there. Javarius Allen's out there in about 23% of leagues. Some call him Buck Allen, same thing. He's not a sexy pick. It's not a great pick, but here's what he will do for you. He'll get you about 8 to 10 carries a game. He'll get you about 3 to 5 targets per game in the passing game and an occasional touchdown. Now, Collins is a better running back on that team. He's a better pure runner. And Flacco and that offense are struggling and not good. So he has limited upside. But he's a guy that's a decent fill-in if you need a guy, whether it's injuries or bye weeks. He's somebody that's out there in about 25% of leagues, I believe. Another guy out there, and he's out there in about 14% of leagues. This is another one of those, especially if you're in a PPR league. But he's averaging 21.8 points per game in PPR leagues. This guy continues to have a big game. Today he had 4 catches, 105 yards. He also had more touches than ever. He had 16 carries today. And I think the reason why is with Robert Kelly out and Samaje Perine really running like he's stuck in mud, they're going to try to get him more touches. They'll continue to do that. Now, when Robert Kelly comes back, he won't get as many carries because they want to keep him healthy. But they're going to continue to work him into the passing game. Coaches said they loved him going into this year. They're going to make sure to keep him involved. They've done exactly that. He's available once again in about 14% of leagues out there. Chris Thompson. So here's another guy that would be a long-term answer for you. Robert Kelly. Available in 66% of leagues. Samaje Perine is not the answer. In fact, Perine's yards per carry are under 3. This is Robert's job when he comes back. And so as soon as he gets back from his injury and he's healthy and ready to roll, which might be this week coming up, he's going to be the starting running back there. He's going to get a majority of the carries. He'll average probably 15, 20 carries a game with Chris Thompson staying in that third down back role, coming off the bench, change of pace, things like that. So be patient, stash this guy, and whenever he comes back, you could have yourself a nice starting running back there. He won't be spectacular, but he'll definitely be adequate for you. So another guy out there is Alec Collins. We've talked about him a lot. He's available in 69% of leagues. They continue to add more carries to his game. If you go back 5 weeks, he had 7 carries. Then 2 weeks after, he had 9, 9, 12. And then this week, he had 15 carries, the most carries he had by far. And he's by far the most effective running back there. He runs with authority. He's strong. He's physical. He's explosive. He's running really well. His yards per carry right now at 6.5. And so it's a really good back out there, available in 69% of leagues. Alec Collins. Another one out there is Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack's available in 54% of leagues. Now, something interesting happened this week. A coach made a statement about him, and that statement was very telling. One, he said Mack is not ready to be the every down back. So that kind of gives us a little idea where the coach is thinking in terms of where his head's at, where he feels in terms of his talent. But two, the coach also said that he's needing to get the ball more into his hands. So once again, he's not ready for a full-time job, but the coach said we need to get him the ball more. Last game that he played, he had 9 carries for 91 yards and a touchdown. Frank Gore is a great running back. He's 34 years old. He doesn't have the explosiveness he once did. He's not the powerful back he once did. He's barely an average back at this point. The future of this team and organization is with a guy like Marlon Mack, so they're definitely going to get him the ball and see what he can do. He's more dynamic. He's more explosive. And probably a team that's going to rebuild this year, that's the direction I'm going to look. And so Marlon Mack is out there in quite a few leagues still. The other one out there is Matt Forte. Matt Forte is available in about 80% of leagues. Now he's older at this point. And what I would say with him is between him, Powell, and McGuire, when they're on the field, they split a lot of carries and they rob value from each other. But if Powell's out another game, Forte is a guy that I would play. I would watch injury reports, see how it rolls out. If Powell's out, or if McGuire's out, or something like that's out. If all three of them are healthy, then I hesitate to go with any of them. But if one of those guys happens to be out for injuries, then I would feel comfortable going with one of those guys. Right now, Matt Forte played this weekend. He looked decent out there. Has got a little bit of gas in the tank. Watch the injury reports. Once again, he's a guy that you could use. Another guy out there to consider is Chris Ivory. Now, this one's kind of a little swing for the fence. He's available in about 90%, 96% of leagues. Now, he's a very physical runner. He pounds the ball, but usually he disappears in the passing game. If you just look at the way he runs, the type of running back that he is, that's what he'll do. He's very physical. He runs hard between the tackles. But today he had 9 catches for 74 yards, which is kind of a surprise. Now, the only reason why I'm talking about him is because Fournette left with an ankle injury. But Fournette did return later, but he was not there for the final drive of the game, and so there's some speculation of what's really going on, how serious was his ankle injury. If Fournette misses any time at all, Chris Ivory is your guy that you want to pick up. So once again, I wouldn't run to him, I wouldn't grab him right now, but I would keep an eye on him, keep an eye on the injury situation for Leonard, and if he happens to miss a game, Chris is your guy that you need to pick up. Now I want to move on to talk about some wide receiver guys that you need to consider. First guy you need to consider is Sterling Shepard. He's available in 48% of leagues out there. He didn't play this week. He's recovering from an ankle injury, and he may not be ready this week coming up. But he's a very talented wideout. He's not just somebody that you can who's a fill-in because Odell Beckham and Marshall are now out. This is a guy who's very young and very talented. He's very much the real deal. So when he does come back, he's going to become the #1 wideout on that team. He's got talent. In fact, I would say that he passed Marshall in terms of targets and talent on that team before he had the injury. If you look at last year, this is playing alongside Odell Beckham. Odell Beckham got a lot of the targets and touchdowns, but last year as a rookie, he had 65 catches, 683 yards, and 8 TDs. So now he's going to move in that role as the #1 wideout the rest of the year when he's back, and he'll be a great wide receiver out there. He's available in about 50%. He will be the #1 guy out there, and he's got great dynasty value. Marquez Lee, available in 67%. He came back today from his back injury. He'd been out for a while. He had 5 catches, 83 yards, had a decent day. Now, him and Allen Hurns will always battle. Now, what we typically see is Marquez Lee, he'll typically get a lot more targets. Now, when it comes to the pay dirt, for whatever reason, Hurns gets more look in the pay dirt. But Marquez Lee can have a decent game for you from time to time. Once again, he's what we call matchup dependent. So I would definitely look at the matchup, see if it's a passer-friendly defense, things like that. But in the right situation, he's a guy that you could pick up and be a fill-in for you. Corey Davis. He's 6'3", first-round pick, 5th overall. He had his first game of the year. He was doing really well. He had 6 catches, 67 yards, got injured. He's missed a lot of time, but he's due back any day now. When he does come back, he's a great guy for you to put on your team. He's got value not only this year, but he's got a lot of dynasty value. And currently on that team, Rashard Matthews is the #1 wideout, but in all reality, Rashard Matthews is not a #1 wideout. This guy was drafted to be that guy, to be the #1 guy. So Corey Davis, keep an eye out there. He's available in a lot of leagues. He's due back any week now from his injury, and when he does, he could become a decent fill-in for you. Another guy very similar is Mike Williams, 6'4", 7th overall pick for the Chargers. He had his first game today. He's missed a lot of time because of a back injury. Had his first game today. He had 1 catch. Didn't play a lot. He was only on the field, I believe, for 9 snaps. They're going to work him back in slowly. But once he starts to play, he's going to quickly pass Tyrell Williams and Benjamin. Definitely, he'll become the #2 guy. He'll be opposite there of Allen. So he's a guy that you definitely need to keep your eye on there, especially if you're in a dynasty league. He's a guy to snatch up now and stash. Another guy out there that's looking better and better each week is Nelson Aguilar. He's available in 46% of leagues. He's got 4 TDs so far this year, and he's playing for a really good young quarterback, a future superstar and quarterback Wentz. And he's looking good right now. In fact, going into this preseason and going into the year, had rave reviews coming out of camp. Quarterbacks say he looked great, looking explosive, he learned the offense. They really loved him. And so far, he's looking better and better each week, becoming more and more consistent and contributing week in and week out. So he's a guy that you need to pick up out there, Nelson Aguilar. Another guy out there a lot is Robert Woods. He's available in 92% of leagues. Now, that's really hard because you got Watson, you've got Kupp on there. But of those 3 wideouts, he's turned out to be the most consistent wideout on that team week in and week out. So he's probably the guy you want to roll with if you need somebody off of that team. In fact, 3 of the last 4 weeks, here's a line that he's had. He had 5 catches for 70 yards one game. He had 5 catches, 66 yards, and he had 6 catches for 108 yards. And that's 3 of the last 4 games. He's been pretty productive. Robert Woods is available in 92% of leagues out there. Just some other guys to consider deep sleepers out there for wideouts. Some of you may consider John Brown for Arizona. Now, John Brown's difficult for me because here's what happens. You got John Brown, you got J.J. Nelson, then you got Jerron Brown, not to be confused with John Brown. And a lot of times from week to week, they'll split targets, so it's hard to tell week in and week out who you're going to get. But right now, of the 3, John Brown is probably the most consistent. He did have a touchdown this week. That's back-to-back weeks he's at a TD. Although any of those wide receivers we mentioned have limited value just because they split the targets up so much. Some other guys out there you may want to consider, and what I would consider deep sleepers out there is Laquan Treadwell of the Vikings. He had a beautiful one-handed catch today. He was a first-round pick last year who's really been disappointing up to this point. He's been injured a lot. He's underachieved. But today he got to play with Diggs out there. Diggs sat because of an injury, and he had 3 catches, 51 yards, and he looked good. He looked good. He's starting to show some signs that he's making progress. So Laquan Treadwell is a guy that you may want to keep an eye on out there. Another guy out there that's looking better is Josh Dotson of Washington. He had a TD today. That's his second TD in 3 games. He was a first-round pick who's missed some time, but he's starting to see increased playing time. He's starting to make noise in practice, and he's beginning to move up the depth chart. Coaches like this guy. And the other thing that coincided with this is Crowder, who came in this year. A lot of people felt it was going to be a really good option there in wide receiver. Has really been disappeared at this point. And so Dotson is somebody you want to keep an eye on. Another guy to keep an eye on out there is Dante Moncrief. Now, he's been very quiet this year, and he has struggled. But the key is that Andrew Luck's going to return. Now, last year in 9 games, he had 7 touchdowns. So last year, Moncrief in just 9 games had 7 TDs. So once Luck returns, he has huge value. Now, the guy that you need to keep an eye on tonight, late in tonight's game, is Emmanuel Sanders left the game. He looked like he was in a lot of pain. It was a leg injury. We don't know the extent of the injury. Who would take his place? Well, it looks like possibly Jordan Taylor or Benny Fowler would take his place, although I don't think any one of those guys would be great options. They're certainly not the talent level of Emmanuel Sanders, and Trevor Siemian's not a great quarterback playing for an offense that's not a great offense. So, yeah, you could look at that, but I would probably say those aren't great options. But keep an eye this week and see what happens with Emmanuel Sanders and his injury. So here's some tight ends for you to consider. George Kittle. He's available in 92% of leagues. San Francisco loves this guy. That's why they trade away Vance McDonald. They keep talking about him more and more. Last week he had a great game, and this week he followed up with another solid game. In fact, in the last 2 games, he had 17 targets, 129 yards, and 11 catches. He's a young, talented player. He's going to see more looks in that offense in the process of rebuilding. George Kittle is a guy that you can really rely on from this point forward. Okay, so here's a guy. I really hope you understand what I'm about to tell you here. Okay, we've talked about this guy in the preseason. We talked about him in sleepers. We talked about him a number of weeks, and that's Evan Ingram. He's available in 31% of leagues, and he shouldn't really be available in many leagues at all. Now, tonight the Giants struggled. They had no wide receivers out there, and he accounted for 64% of the offense. He had 5 catches, 82 yards, and a TD. Eli has somebody that has to throw the ball to down the stretch here, and it's going to be this guy. They talked about him all year long. He's a freak, a physical talent. He's got great hands, explosive. He is as talented as Gronk and Kelsey. He's that type of player, Travis Kelsey or Gronk. He's a guy that you've got to pick up, you've got to run with, especially if you're in a keeper league, a dynasty league where you have to have a tight end. Evan Ingram is the real deal. He's an extremely talented guy. He looks better and better each week. You got to grab this guy. You got to put him on your team now. Another guy that's out there in quite a few leagues is Cameron Brate. He's had touchdowns 4 weeks in a row. He's developed into a very dependable, good, quality tight end. He may not be pretty, not be exciting, but he's going to get the job done, and he is available in a lot of the leagues out there. Cameron Brate. Another guy we talked about there is Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Now, this guy, they've talked about him for years in football. Talked about what a great, talented athlete he is. He's got wonderful tools. He's very gifted. Now, the one problem is he couldn't stay healthy and he couldn't stay out of trouble. But he seems to be settling down. He's been playing for the Jets. In the last 4 weeks, he's looked great. In fact, 4 weeks, he's had 23 total catches. He's had back-to-back weeks of touchdown. Today, he had 8 catches for 46 yards and a TD, and he just missed a second touchdown as he was reaching for the pylon. The ball slipped out of his hand, or otherwise he had 2 TDs to get today. He's looking really good. He's a check-down guy there. He's certainly somebody you need to take a look at. Some other things out there to consider defense-wise. Here's some that maybe people may overlook. Next week, Pittsburgh plays Cincinnati. Pittsburgh is a really, really talented defense. They can bring a lot of pressure to the quarterback. They're great against the pass. And right now, Cincinnati's not doing very good. In fact, Cincinnati gives up the 4th most points to defenses, and they're available in 31% of leagues. So once again, Pittsburgh available in 31% of leagues. Pick them up. Another defense out there is Dallas. Now, Dallas is going against San Francisco. Now, this may not look like a pretty matchup initially. Dallas' defense is not great. San Francisco, up to this point, has given up a ton of points to defenses. But anytime you're dealing with a rookie quarterback getting his first start, it's always worth rolling the dice on. So if you're desperate for defense, Dallas is not a bad play next week. And the other one's Philadelphia versus Washington. Washington actually gives up a decent amount of points to defenses. Washington's offense, I should say. And Philadelphia's defense is opportunistic, and they like to come at the quarterback, and so it's not a bad matchup there. Here's a few more things to consider. I don't talk about kickers very often because typically a kicker is very what we call a situational play. Oftentimes, if you need to pick up a kicker, instead of looking at the talent of the kicker, it's better to look at who they're playing. But there are a couple of kickers I want to mention out there. Jake Elliott, this guy is insane. He's been killing everything. I think he's near the top, if not leading all kickers, even though he missed week 1. Another guy coming on is Harrison Buckner, Kansas City's kicker. He's been kicking really good, plays for decent offense. So those are 2 kickers that you may want to take a look at. Harrison Buckner, or Butker, and Jake Elliott are 2 kickers you may want to look at. Thanks for joining me today. We just talked about a lot of players out there. There's so much to consider. Once again, you got to put in the context of your league, scoring system, availability. There's so many factors I can't qualify or quantify. So if you have specific questions, we'd love to hear that. Send us a message. God bless and have a good night.